Board Nagan is the statutory body which is responsible for the control, promotion and operation of greyhound racing, the overall control of coursing, the promotion of greyhound exports, the operation of the tote betting, if I could say it, the word properly out, the regulation of public sales of greyhounds, the marketing and grants for prize money, the allocation of grants to improve amenities at tracks, the licensing of greyhound tracks and their officials, the authorisation of bookmakers to conduct business at tracks, and the collection of levies on course bets. In that context, it runs commercial operations in a number of greyhound stadia. In total, there are 17 greyhound tracks licensed by Board Nagan, with Board Nagan currently owning Shelbourne Park, Harles Cross, Cork, Tralee, Waterford, Youghal, Limerick and Galway, and also has a 51% share in the Mullingar track. In an economic report by Jim Power in 2010, it was estimated that the greyhound industry is responsible for sustaining in excess of 10,000 full and part-time jobs, both directly and indirectly, many in rural communities, and injects an estimated 500 million into local economies. The greyhound breeding industry is also very export orientated, with over 75% of greyhounds now running in the UK being Irish bred. Greyhound racing attracts thousands of tourists to Ireland from many countries, particularly France, Germany and the UK, and it works closely with Tourism Ireland, Fáilte Ireland and the various tour operators. Ireland is regarded as a world-class player in greyhound breeding, and there is considerable potential for further development in this area. The Irish Greyhound Derby, run in Shelbourne Park, is one of the richest greyhound races in the world. With regard to Board Nagan accounts, the 2015 accounts audited have been submitted to my department and were forwarded to government yesterday for noting. The accounts show some positive metrics for Board Nagan, but it remains a case that the financial position of the board is extremely challenging and would be considerably worse without the additional subvention from the Horse and Greyhound Fund in 2015, which was an additional 2.8 million, in overall terms. The turnover is up to 13.6 million. In overall terms, the turnover from racing activities increased by 12.5%, from 25.02 million in 2014 to 28.16 million in 2015, due mainly to the introduction of their new food and beverages business. While on-course wagering experienced a decline, which is also a feature of horse racing, the impact on tote turnover has been reduced through the introduction of numerous international commingling customers and the growth of online wagering on the tote following the introduction of the Barking Buzz app. However, having said all this, Board Nagan has been operating in a very difficult financial environment for a number of years, and in particular since 2011, when it took on a considerable debt as a result of the development of the Limerick Stadium. In 2014, against the background of reducing income for the organisation through the recession and the significant debt burden, my department commissioned an independent report into certain matters relating to Board Nagan, including its financial performance and prospects. That report, known as the Indicon report, provided a roadmap for sustainable development of the greyhound sector, and in that context recommended a number of asset disposals, including Harles Cross, in order to reduce the debt burden. The first asset disposed of was the former Board Nagan headquarters in Henry Street in 2015 for approximately 700,000, with the proceeds being offset against the board's debt. Board Nagan is continuing to work very closely with its banking partners to manage the issues arising from a legacy debt of 12.5 million relating to Limerick Stadium, which continues to overhang the industry and inhibit its development. The board also operates a term loan facility of 6 million, which is subject to fixed annual payments. The balance of this facility was reduced to 3.9 million as of 31st December 2016. In addition, the board has approved an overdraft facility of 6.25 million. Currently, the net group debt stands at 20.3 million, down from 21.6 million in 2015. So the debt is moving in the right direction, but at a slow rate. One of the key risks to the future of the industry is the scale of that debt, and that it still remains. I understand that Bord na Gán, having considered the matter and having regard to the recommendations of the Indicon report, has decided to cease racing at Harold's Cross with a view to putting the stadium on the market in order to reduce its debt levels and increase its capacity to provide support and assistance to the industry. And while this is very regrettable, it is the view that there is no other option at this time. If the debt burden on the organisation is to be reduced in any meaningful way, I understand it is the intention to transfer the Harold's Cross racing schedule to Shelbourne Park, and that all 12 staff at Harold's Cross will be offered redeployment. But I would ask, finally, it should be noted that any sale of Harold's Cross will require the consent of Minister Creed and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. Ministers will consider any specific proposals for its sale, having regard to the Indicon recommendations, the value obtainable, the need to avoid any further burden on the taxpayer, and the need to reduce the significant burden of debt, so that the resources can be better deployed towards the development of the sector rather than the servicing of that debt. There has already been significant government commitment to this sector in recent years, with the contribution of the taxpayer through the Horse and Greyhound Fund having increased from 10.8 million in 2014 to 16 million in 2017. The Government remains committed to continuing to support this vitally important sector. However, it is clear that if it has to have a sustainable future, the burden of debt at Bord na Gán has to be reduced. In this regard, the Board has its responsibilities to discharge, which involves some very difficult decisions. And it cannot be that the entire burden of resolving the sector's difficulties falls on the taxpayer, as this may involve some very difficult decisions also. Just with regard to the new Greyhound legislation, and I intend to bring the heads of the Greyhound industry bill to the Cabinet next week, followed shortly afterwards by a pre-legislative scrutiny process in front of the Joint Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine. The bill seeks to address in general terms issues relating to the governance and regulation of the greyhound racing sector. The heads reflect recommendations for legislative change made in the Indicon report commissioned by the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine in 2014, in the Greyhound report of the Joint Committee of Agriculture, Food and the Marine published in 2015, and in the Morris Review of Anti-Doping Medication in Ireland commissioned by Bord na Gán and published in 2016. They address governance issues in Bord na Gán, provide a robust legal basis for strengthened regulatory controls in the industry, modernise sanctions, improve integrity and include the welfare of greyhounds as one of the statutory functions of Bord na Gán. In addition, it provides Bord na Gán with the powers to make regulations in relation to the substance that may be used or given to a greyhound, prohibiting the use of certain substances and setting the thresholds in relation to others. And I very much look forward to engaging with the colleagues in a positive and constructive way on the development of this bill. It is clear that the development of the sector depends entirely on its reputation, and a robust and modern legislative framework is critical of part of that dynamic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister.
Moving on to the greyhound industry, Minister, as you rightly say, it employs 10,300 people with a 500 million economic output. And since 2002, there's been 10 million people. So these are brilliant figures for an industry that, unfortunately, however, is receiving a lot of bad press, and in the eyes of the public out there is not functional. We support in Fianna Fáil, and I personally support the fact that they receive 20%, i.e. 16 million of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund. But I would put an addendum there, Minister, that under the current circumstances and given the figures that you have given, which are alarming and frightening, of the debt associated with the sector, that this money should be used more like in the horse racing. 63% of the money received by the horse and racing industry is allocated towards prize funds. This is not happening in the greyhound racing sector, and the prize funds are minimal. And like the old adage, if there's no carrot at the end of the stick, straight away, you're not going to be moving forward. And I think the whole export sales of greyhounds have suffered because of this. And I think as the Minister who is giving over this money, that you need to put some addendum to it, that they would take up a similar kind of a system of a mandatory amount of the money they receive going towards prize money, which would help to bring the industry back, I won't say forward, but back to where it was in days of old. Again, unfortunately, I go back to the All-Party Joint Committee on Agriculture, and they produced a report in 2016 again, which was forwarded to the department. And on the back of that, if you go to any topic or any subject, I suppose politically or across the spectrum in this country, if you start coming across report after report after report, you know you have a problem. And you've mentioned Indicon, Morris, Jim Power, and I'd like to include in that the All-Party Joint Committee report 2016. But on the back of that, there was to be, and I welcome the fact that you say you're bringing it to Cabinet next week, but it's way too late at this stage. We see what's going on and the state the industry is in, and all the time we're waiting for a promised legislation in the Greyhound Industry Bill. So it's a pity it didn't come sooner. I do welcome you're bringing it to Cabinet next week, but it's from your own report, Minister, I think it's very evident how necessary this new bill is. But along with that, you know, there must be serious governance issues in the greyhound industry. And the Harold's Cross issue, which you mentioned, and I don't have time to go into now in detail, when you're in financial difficulty, you most likely have to sell an asset. And if you're going to sell an asset, you'll sell your best asset. And Harold's Cross is the best asset. But it's the manner in which that whole process was carried out. You know, if you're working as Bordnagon with owners, trainers, breeders, bookies, caterers, staff, you have some negotiations, you have some method of informing people what's coming down the line. You don't go in on a Monday morning and put a chain and locks on gates. And I think the very way that it has been handled has given the whole industry even worse press than it probably is deserving of. They didn't do themselves any favours. And as a result, now we have a strike in Dublin with owners and trainers, and who are refusing to other owners and trainers are put in a precarious position where they find that they're unable to pass this strike in Shelburne, and already in Shelburne Park we've lost the two semi-finals of the Gold Cup. And if this strike, which is threatened, goes to the rural tracks, many of them on the night they have to close because of the strike will not be open the following night, because basically of the figures which you have so well mentioned. So I think it needs to be a strong look at Bordnagon, its governance and management. Any organisation or individual who would carry out a procedure like the way they carried out the procedure of closing down Harold's Cross, I think it just portrays why they're in the position they're in, if that's how they do their business. Okay.
Whereas the greyhound industry, and as Minister, as you have been hearing, it is in decline because a number of legacy issues now need to be addressed. There's a lot of problems and issues within the industry. However, it is an indigenous industry that has strong potential if managed properly. I do want to recognise at the outside, Minister, the support that you and your department give to the organic sector. And indeed, in many communities around the country, there are new businesses and enterprises growing from the various incentives supported by you and your department. The main reason I stand, though, Minister, is to outline my concerns with regard to the future of the Irish greyhound industry. And just to speak very briefly about its value to the economy, which has already been outlined. And I'm amazed to hear the Sinn Féin representative asking the question, where do these people work? The over 10,000 people confirmed to work and make a living out of the greyhound industry in Ireland. Well, I can tell you, Senator, that I know many hundreds in my own community that do make a living from the greyhound industry, and I'm sure that's replicated right around the country. And indeed, many trainers and breeders do make that living. But you're not also taking into account, and if you attended the various racetracks and supported the industry, if Sinn Féin supported the greyhound industry, they would see the many people that work in our tracks around the country, maintaining and ensuring the tracks are fit for purpose, the many drivers and van people that utilise, the veterinary people that ensure that greyhounds are kept in top order, and the catering and bar staff and the stewards indeed as well, and the maintenance people. They're the people that work in the greyhound industry, people that Sinn Féin are not willing to recognise, given the statements made here in the Chamber today. And it's quite obvious if Sinn Féin don't recognise the value of that to Ireland's economy, well then that is no surprise that they then oppose the funding that is provided for both the horse racing and the greyhound industries, which are indigenous rural industries in Ireland that I certainly want to see long maintained and long supported in this country. Minister, I have met recently with owners, breeders and trainers, and indeed patrons as well, who are very, very concerned about the current state of the industry. They are frustrated, they are angry, they are annoyed, and they want action. And I support them in that, Minister. There is a loss of confidence right across the sector, and that confidence needs to be restored. And the only way that will happen, with you at the helm, Minister, as a new Minister, is reviewing and reforming the entire sector from the top down, and that includes the board, the management of tracks, and indeed any governance structures that are included. Minister, you recently met with a Fine Gael group of Oireachtas members that includes my colleague Ray Butler, who is beside me, and indeed Joe Carey, TD as well, and many others, who are very strongly supportive of the greyhound industry. And we outlined personally to you our concerns, and we want you and your officials to listen. There are many legacy issues that you have inherited, Minister, but they need to be tackled and tackled now. And the legacy issues, yes, might have been down to poor governance or whatever reasons over the last number of years. And I have to say this, and it's no disrespect to the officials that sit behind you, but the Department of Agriculture officials were in situ when a lot of these legacy issues arose. And there needs to be accountability right throughout the system, from the ministerial accountability to senior officials in the Department of Agriculture to senior people in the Irish Greyhound Board. It's not good enough, Minister, that this industry is being put at risk due to bad management and poor governance. We have an opportunity, and I want to add my voice to support you, Minister, with your new legislation which you are due to publish very soon. I want to support you, and I'm sure colleagues will as well, because we see that this industry is indigenous to Ireland and it has a strong potential. But changes are needed. We need to attack the doping controversies that have existed. We need to take on the legacy issues and the debt problems that are there. But we need to review track viability. Find ways to attract patrons back into attending our racetracks, ensuring that they're attractive again, ensuring that they're bringing people back to enjoy a night's entertainment, which is what it is. So an urgent review is required. Minister, in my own area in Waterford, Kilcone Park, a famous stadium not only around Ireland but has many famous racing days and indeed soccer days as well. It's only open one night a week at the present time. That is a crying shame, Minister, because I believe with a reform of how we enter dogs and how we encourage and incentivise trainers and breeders to enter dogs in racing, we can increase the numbers. There are good people within the industry, I want to acknowledge that, and good people managing our tracks, but we need to review it so we can have more racing nights and make them more viable. I'd say no more, Minister. I do know that there is a controversial programme due to be broadcast on prime time, and maybe that's a good thing, on RT next week or the week after. Let's uncover the problems that are there and let's tackle them now. Minister, I will support you in that, and I'm sure other colleagues will as well.
Thanks very much, Senator Coffey. Next speaker is Senator Breen O'Donnell, and you have 5 minutes.
And to welcome the Minister and his officials here for this particular debate, which is an important debate. And I will focus my remarks to the greyhound industry side of today's debate. It's an industry which the Minister is very much aware of, and you have listened to the industry, particularly in your role as Chairman of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture. But I would agree with everything that Senator Coffey is just after expressing. I think he hit the nail on the head by saying that this industry is in turmoil at the moment. And I was reading and listening to your own sentiments, Minister, in relation to the 2015 audited accounts, which are going to government and then will be laid before the Oireachtas. But unfortunately, they make for grim reading. And I had an opportunity to view the accounts because they were published on the Irish Greyhound Board website very briefly and then removed again. But if they are the same accounts which are to be presented to both houses of the Oireachtas, they show the IGB totally incompetent of running the industry. For example, what the increase in expenditure from the taxpayer in by 25% of an increase from 2014 to 2015, at the same period, the legal and professional fees associated with running the IGB affairs increased by 245% in 1 year. The media and other income, so other income, was down by 70% to only €100,000. The IGB income for 2015, €101,138,000. So without the taxpayers' intervention, this organisation is insolvent. I think alarm bells need to start ringing quickly in Agriculture House in relation to this particular organisation. Otherwise, a major national scandal is only weeks away. The ordinary punters, the owners and the breeders, are not being listened to. They were outside these houses last week, where I met some of them. I've spoken to others over the phone at the weekend. The ordinary punters, the people who breed and run greyhounds, are not being listened to by the organisation with state responsibility for administering the sector. That's wrong. So, Minister, I would appeal to you not to continue to allow this organisation to continue running the industry into the ground. We see what's happening with Harold's Cross. So to meet their incompetence, managerial incompetence, accountability incompetence, transparency incompetence, the answer is to sell the Harold's Cross facility. We have seen protests. It's my understanding that those protests will continue outside Shelbourne Park at every race night, because the greyhound owners and breeders are not being listened to. Their only option is to do that, to highlight their concerns outside Shelbourne Park. They need to be listened to. This industry is at an impasse, and I would appeal to you, Minister, to intervene. And I would agree with Senator Coffey. The current board of the IGB are not fit for purpose, and they need to be replaced. Stakeholder accountability and transparency needs to be brought into this sector. And this is very, very urgent in my view. This organisation is getting state subsidy of €285,000 a week this year. This year, a week. That is unreal money. From a financial management perspective within the public sector finances, and with all of the good work done by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, this organisation meets none of those standards. And I say that as someone with a financial background. And therefore, Minister, the recommendations made by the Agriculture Committee, of which there are 13, dating back to January 2016, if implemented, would solve at least some of the problems. I know that the legislation is coming forward, and I welcome that. And I welcome your own efforts, Minister, in bringing that forward, because you're working hard on that, and I appreciate that. But unfortunately, by the time the legislation passes through these houses, it may be too late. An urgent intervention is required here. I think that it's not for me to suggest what should or should not happen. But I think, Minister, that you need to intervene. And I would ask that you use your good offices in conjunction with your officials to ensure that intervention happens within days, not weeks, because unfortunately this is going to rocket out of control if something doesn't happen very, very quickly. Gormahigan.
Thanks very much, Senator Doyle. The next speaker is Senator Ray Butler, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Minister, for coming in. I want to speak on the greyhound issue. I've been involved in greyhounds all my life. I've bred, I've raced, and I've trained greyhounds all my life. And my family history goes back where we've won competitions and won major competitions in this industry. The greyhound industry, the Irish greyhound industry, is the best in the world. We're noted for breeding the best greyhounds in the world. The Irish greyhound industry employs 10 to 10,500 people. Now, unfortunately, there's legacy issues. And we had a CEO there and I'm not putting the blame game on any party or anything, from the previous administration that was on 300,000 a year. The Taoiseach of the day wasn't getting the same wages as that CEO. Absolute disgrace. He was told not to go ahead with Limerick by solicitors and architects, and he went ahead with it. And he ploughed $1 million into a hole in the ground with clay to fill in before he even started building Limerick Greyhound Stadium that became a white elephant. Now, we have a new CEO, Geraldine Larkin is gone, and I hope, Minister, there's a rumour. Just
to remind you, you're not the parliamentary practice of not naming
okay.
people or identifying people who.
Yes, I understand that.
Just for your own
yes.
benefit.
The last CEO is gone now, and we have a new CEO in, and I hope that the rumour is not true that the last CEO was paid to go. I hope that's not true. The new CEO has been very, very brutal in coming to town. There's ways and means in dealing with people. And I don't think by closing Harold's Cross is going to solve the problem. Harold's Cross will raise maybe 6 or 7 million. I see the problem being solved by the betting levy online of 1%. Now, there's 1 million that was raised last year, and that's going to go up because online betting is going through the roof. And as the money comes in, that 1 million could be 2 million next year. And why can we not start paying off the debt with that money and leave the other money that the government are putting in to run the industry for prize money? The banks will have to sit down and deal with us, because at the end of the day it's not going to be good PR to be closing down greyhound tracks in rural Ireland or closing down an industry. So the banks will have to be brought in, and we can deal with them when the time comes. The IGB in Limerick, the pensions deficit is a huge problem, and I believe the figure is 8 million. And wages, I believe there's 9 people or 10 people down there on 100,000 a year. Absolutely ludicrous. Now, I've listened to another party member here tonight, and that party opposed the funding in this year's budget, Sinn Féin. But yet Sinn Féin have no problem in going and doing fundraising at greyhound tracks like Dundalk and Shelburne Park. But they oppose the funding of greyhound racing. So they want 10,000 people out of work, but they have no problem going and fundraising for their organisation at these greyhound tracks.
And where are they now?
Well, there's nobody. They've left the building. Elvis has left the building. So, Minister, this strike is going to go on. And I think we have to sit down round the table and see what's best for the greyhound industry. And we do have to look at prize money. I know that the ordinary person that has the grading dog from A5 down is not too unhappy about €300 first prize money or a little bit more. It's the bigger stakes where we need the better dogs to come into competition. That's where we need the funding. And the Derby prize money has been cut. The Cesarevich prize money has been cut. And all the classic money has been cut. So we have to look at putting better funding in to the better racing, and we'll get the better results, because better racing brings out the people. All is not lost. This can be reversed. But, Minister, we need to sit down round with people, and we need to look at the board. I think it's time now that we do need a new board in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Butler. Perfectly timed at 5 minutes. Now, I have no other senators indicating to speak, so, Minister, I'm now going to call on you, and you have 10 minutes to respond. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Cahir. If it's okay, I'll try. I'll deal with the organics for 5 minutes. And I personally would understood I was to speak to one issue, have the questions and answers, and then speak to the other, which I would prefer. If I leave anything out, I'm happy to try, and if people prompt me and remind me.
If you have got to 5 minutes and you're still on the organics, I'll indicate that you have 5 minutes
just
left.
Said, please, yeah. Just on the first one, because it was Senator Daly, and I actually, the leakage came up identified, and this was identified in the value for money review. So the increased maintenance payment of 60% now in operation means that most people are opting to stay, and the agreement from the Commission to extend their contract. So what I was saying earlier is we've harmonised all of the various different participants into the one stream. So by the end of this rural development programme, everybody will be coming out. It's 26,000 extra hectares, not 46, but the aim was 16,000. So I know it is, the scheme budget has been increased and extended, and it's actually been a success. So I suppose that's a good indicator. What I would love to be able to say is that in the next programme we'll be able to extend it further, but until we know the level of funding that will come through that, it's impossible to be honestly able to say that, but it would be the target. And I would refer back to my first term in the Doyle here, 2007 to 2011, when the then Minister Trevor Sargent said we're at 1%. If we can get to 2% over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have done a really good job, and we've done that. And he was I'd have to acknowledge, one of the first people to actually advocate and champion the value of the organic sector. And you see it in the figures. There are specific issues. And just going through the Oireachtas Committee report, what I propose to do is, rather than go through them today, but I could say that a number of them are agreed and implemented. But if you want, I can try to go through some of them. But the delays in payments, unfortunately, is a symptom, I think, of 75% of all the 1,740 have been paid. Loss is an overhang. As people will have seen, I haven't been paid myself, and I'm told that it's an IT issue. So, I mean, it is every effort, and I can tell you, on the 6th floor in the Department of Ag House, there's a dedicated team of officials trying to go through these cases one by one to get them through. There's individual issues with the organic applications, the 300 odd or whatever that's left, that they're trying to go through different parcel identifications to earn out and pay. And it isn't in the department's interest to actually be holding on to anybody's money, because they have to explain further down the line to both the European Commission and the Court of Auditors, that they've met targets to hit on regarding their payment. Adopt a flexible approach and the front loading. The Commission were that was brought to the Commission, the front loading. But the basic principle of income foregone comes into play here, and it's very difficult to costs incurred and income foregone. To say that the costs incurred and income foregone on the first vary from hectare to hectare essentially, and it's something that it was decided not to push any further at this point in time, because it doesn't seem to be going to get favour with the Commission. And just to go through one or two that I think it was Senator McLaughlin raised as well, of the recommendations that are actually agreed. 8 is agreed, should liaise with both farmers and factories to ensure that organic meat is sold as such attracts a premium price and not merely sold as an ordinary meat. The problem has been a number of factors with the increase in sheep meat, in particular, geography and the unavailability of processing on the western half of the country, and the availability of reasonable value organic feed, and the competing price for the competitive price that conventional lamb trade makes at that time. This year may be slightly different, but in general terms, lamb prices have gone up significantly during the most expensive time to feed. So farmers take an economic decision and say, well, it's not really worth pursuing it, and that's something we really have to check up on. Okay, there are. I can make sure that everybody gets a response back to this, and certainly with regard to all 17, because I was chair of the committee at the time, each and every one of these have a response and a reason if they're not agreed or if they are agreed. I'll just say the graduated penalty point system has been agreed and now fully in place, just to say that's one. If I might move to greyhounds and to thank the contributors. I don't disagree with a lot of what was said. This is a legacy issue. I would point out, and people do call for a new governance and the call for the dissolving of the board, just to make the point that there's only one board member still a member that predates that period. I have refrained from appointing anybody for two reasons. One is their term hasn't expired, and secondly, and I'm in office in this job since May, I've been anxious and trying to get this legislation agreed, and we finally have it, and I think it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the work that's been done in trying to draft it, but to try and tailor it to suit the needs of the greyhound sector. And I'd just like to reassure everybody, I am as committed to it. I found it a learning curve when I got the job, and I thought I knew a considerable amount of it come to hearings, but when I got into it and I realised how complex it is and the various different sectors are, and I insisted, I would say at the outset, in meeting the Dublin Greyhound Breeders Association at my request, and indeed the wider federation, on 2 consecutive days, to hear from them. And I really admire these people. And if somebody could come up with an alternative option, I mean, I think everybody, including the members of the board, would actually rather not be faced with the conflict that is selling Harold's Cross. I take on board everything that's been said about the manner and method in which this has been carried out, and it's something I'll certainly go back with. But I think there is an opportunity in the new legislation, and there's an additional 2 members proposed into draft legislation, and about governance and integrity and sanctions and the independence of the control committee and the appeals committee, and the period and the term and the length, the number of terms that members can serve. There is an opportunity to make sure that there's a more wider-ranging representation. The members that have been filled over the last couple of years have been filled based on the expertise deficit identified in Indicon and went through the public appointment service. And as I understand it now, they predate my time, but when you look at the expertise, there's one individual who's a vet and a barrister. There's one who's a solicitor and state solicitor at one stage for Cork City. There's another person who's a managing director of Bank of Ireland Finance and has executive risk management skills, experience, amongst others. So that was the people that were actually employed at the time. There would appear to be a need to put in the stakeholders, and there would appear to be a need. And I've attended the forum back in October, I think it was, to actually brief everybody, and they were all invited, and I spent 3.5 hours as a member of the legal section of the department to try and hear their views and listen and present the outline of the legislation that I thought we would have in before Christmas, I'll be honest. And I think that structure is good, but I think it needs to have more connectivity so that the recommendations that come through that get onto the board table, and the people on the board, thank you, Carla, the people at the board level representing the best interests of the industry take on board suggestions. Senator Butler raised, for instance, and I'm only picking it because it was actually a tangible suggestion on how to increase revenue and maybe use that revenue to pay down legacy debt and release the funds. When we say we should ring fence exchequer funding to increase prize money and the offering. That's true, but if you're compromised by a debt that you have to service first, you're really limited. By the way, I think the extra expenditure relates to the franchise being taken back and the extra people being employed. And I'm told, though I stand to be corrected, that actually was a net benefit to the revenue stream. I'm also advised that the resignation of the CEO was in accordance with, and legal advice was taken in accordance with the terms of the contract. I haven't got any more detail on that, but if I can, I will get it to you. And finally, to say, when this goes through the pre-led scrutiny, if the House's schedule permits, I would hope to have this legislation fully enacted by the summer recess. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thanks to all the senators involved with the debate.